She didn't make a scene. She didn't raise her voice or throw a fit. She just stood there, quiet, polite, composed. And yet, within minutes, security was on the way. Why? Because she dared to walk into the first-class area of Cleargate Airport. A black woman, dressed in a plain gray sweater and pulling a modest carry-on, had entered a space dominated by crisp suits, Louis Vuitton duffels, and whispers of wealth. Heads turned, eyes locked. She kept hers low, calm, careful. Maybe she didn't notice the stares. Or maybe she noticed every single one but chose silence over spectacle. An employee muttered under their breath. A manager furrowed her brows. Then someone hit a panic button. And suddenly, in full view of every elite traveler in that exclusive terminal, 2 security officers emerged. They walked briskly toward her, radio static hissing from their cuffs, their posture screaming suspicion. But what they didn't know, what no one but one person in that terminal knew, was that the second she reached for her phone, everything would begin to unravel. Because this wasn't just about her skin color. This was about what happens when a system built on silent rules is suddenly forced to confront someone who refuses to bow. The VIP zone at Cleargate Airport wasn't chaotic like the main concourse. It moved slow, quiet, insulated. The kind of place where nothing was questioned, because everyone belonged. Elena Moore stood in the priority line like any other traveler. Her suitcase was scuffed but sturdy, her phone held steadily in one hand, displaying a valid first-class e-ticket. She wore a neat, light gray turtleneck, well-fitted black slacks, and plain leather shoes. No flashy earrings. No designer bags. No entourage. Just a woman waiting to board her flight. And yet she stood out. Not because she was loud or disruptive, but because she didn't fit the unspoken image of wealth this space demanded. Her stillness, her simplicity, her silence. Those were the things that made everyone look. The kind of look that doesn't need words to feel heavy. The kind that says you don't belong here, without anyone saying a thing. Behind the check-in counter stood Patricia Wexler, senior aviation supervisor. Her suit was stiff, her jaw clenched, and her eyes, cold and calculating, zeroed in on Elena like a heat-seeking missile. She didn't scan the crowd. She didn't look at the man fumbling with his Rolex or the woman juggling a Chanel tote. Her focus was fixed, a black woman at the end of the priority line. Patricia didn't see anything objectively wrong. The suitcase wasn't oversized. The shoes weren't dirty. The phone wasn't outdated. But something didn't match, at least not in Patricia's mind. Elena didn't look like she belonged in first class. And that was enough. Without hesitation, Patricia pressed a button on her walkie. Delta 7, check the subject at the end of the priority line. Possible entry into the wrong zone, she said coolly. Like she'd spotted an abandoned bag, not a human being. Elena stepped forward. Her shoes barely made a sound on the polished floor. She didn't flinch, didn't falter. She reached the counter and held up her phone. The e-ticket was clear. Zone 1, first class confirmed. Patricia barely looked at it. She didn't scan the barcode. Didn't ask a single question. Just leveled her with a cold stare and said, "You may be in the wrong line. Economy is over there." No greeting. No courtesy. Just a dismissal wrapped in condescension. Elena didn't flinch. She didn't step back. She didn't explain or apologize. She raised her chin slightly, eyes locked on Patricia's, and said firmly, "I know exactly where I'm standing." Silence. The tension between them thickened. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It was the kind of silence that freezes people mid-swipe on their phones. A few heads turned. A few brows lifted. Patricia's mouth curved into a tight, icy smile. One of those artificial expressions people wear when they realize they've been challenged but don't want to admit it. She didn't argue. She didn't apologize. But something shifted. Because in that moment, just a quiet woman with a ticket and the audacity to take up space she paid for, Elena Moore forced a system to pause, to reveal itself. She hadn't said much. She hadn't needed to. Her very presence was the protest. And the whole terminal? It watched. Instead of responding, Patricia simply tilted her head toward a nearby staff member and gave the faintest flick of her chin. An unspoken command. The kind that doesn't need words to be understood. Handle it. The young staffer stepped forward, arm outstretched slightly. as if ready to steer Elena away before she could even take another step. Elena hadn't moved yet, but Patricia leaned in, just enough to mutter a few words. Not loud enough to be an official statement, but perfectly clear to those standing nearby, including Elena. "Another reward point upgrade," she whispered with a mocking smirk. "Thinks having a seat means sitting next to someone who actually belongs here." No one responded. No one protested. But Elena heard it. Every syllable landed with surgical precision. Still, she didn't flinch. She didn't offer an ID or raise her voice. She didn't defend herself or demand respect. She simply lowered her eyes for a moment to the screen on her phone. There, glowing softly, was a unique booking code. Not one you'd find on any app or airline website. This code was reserved for elite, internal members of the Adverlink group. Not even executives had access to this tier without direct authorization. And what Patricia Wexler didn't know, what no one standing there had the faintest clue about, was that the woman she was trying to quietly eject from the priority lane was the very same person who, just yesterday, signed off on a $3.8 billion strategic rescue deal. A deal that had prevented Grand Sky Airlines from being consumed in a hostile buyout. Without Elena Moore's approval, there would be no airline left to police. But perhaps the real tragedy wasn't what they didn't know. It was what they assumed. That Elena couldn't possibly be anyone important. That she didn't look like power. That she didn't fit the mold of a woman who could quietly walk into a boardroom and decide the fate of an entire corporation. Escorted by 2 security officers, Elena was led down a quiet hall into a small, isolated room. The kind reserved for courtesy checks. A euphemism wrapped in cold lighting and forced politeness. The door read Security Courtesy Room. Internal use only in 3 languages. Inside, the air was sterile. A low hum from the AC buzzed in the background, and a cold white light beamed directly onto the metal table. One officer, a man in his early 40s, sat across from her. He flipped open a notebook like he was trained for this moment. Full name: Elena Moore. Destination: Seattle. Purpose of travel: to conduct an internal review of a strategic partner. Her answers were crisp, factual, unbothered. She gave nothing more than what was required. He scribbled something, paused, then looked up. "If it's business, why are you dressed so plainly?" Elena's head tilted just slightly. Her gaze didn't waver. Calm, unshaken. "Are you asking whether my clothing makes me unqualified?" No response. Across the table, the female officer reached into Elena's fabric tote bag. Inside were a few items: a laptop, a well-used notebook, and a sealed envelope bound with red wax, stamped with the emblem of the Adverlink group. The officer hesitated, then picked it up, inspecting it with a kind of suspicion normally reserved for contraband. "What's this?" "Work documents." "Can we open it?" Elena's voice remained soft, controlled, but every word cut through the air like a scalpel. "If you want to read that, you'll need a lawyer and a court order." The male officer froze. Just for a beat. The female guard cleared her throat. A quiet signal that they were entering dangerous ground. Without waiting, Elena took back the envelope, returned it to her bag, zipped it shut, and sat upright. "If this is a random check, please log it accordingly," she said. "But if this was initiated by someone specific, I want the reason in writing." Silence. Meanwhile, just down the corridor, in the dimly lit control hub, Patricia Wexler lounged in a leather chair. One hand buried in a crinkled snack bag, she chewed slowly, her eyes fixed on the black and white monitor showing the interrogation room. No blinking. No words. Just the smug quiet of someone convinced she was still in control. What Patricia didn't realize was that another camera, one not connected to the internal network, had captured everything. From the flick of her chin, to the muttered slur, to the smirk on her face. And that camera? That footage? It didn't belong to airport security. It belonged to Adverlink. The entire incident had been caught. Every disdainful glance, every wordless judgment, every humiliating second Patricia Wexler watched from her leather chair like she was tuning into her favorite show. She didn't move, didn't blink, didn't even pause as Elena Moore sat in that cold, sterile room being questioned for the crime of existing where others thought she didn't belong. But now, nearly 20 minutes later, Elena emerged with a simple piece of paper in her hand. No violation verified. She didn't pause, didn't scan the terminal for her accusers. Her chin stayed lifted, her pace unbroken. With the same quiet dignity she had walked in with, Elena moved toward the boarding gate. Patricia stood nearby, silent. No apology, no correction. Just a pair of narrow eyes watching her pass like a glitch in the system. A disruption that somehow slipped through unchecked. At the gate, Elena handed over her ticket. A soft green beep. Valid. The agent stepped aside, and Elena entered the first-class cabin. Inside, the cool air whispered of exclusivity. Cream-colored leather, sparkling glassware, the ghost of expensive perfume. Every inch of it crafted to say you've made it. But no one said it to her. Not a nod. Not a smile. Not even the polite indifference shown to regular business travelers. At seat 1C, Elena placed her carry-on in the overhead compartment and sat down. Beside her, in 1A, a white man in his 50s adjusted his cufflinks. A faint scent of menthol tobacco clung to him like a second skin. He glanced at her, said nothing, but the flicker of his eyes said what his mouth didn't dare. You don't belong here. Elena ignored it. Moments later, a familiar face entered the cabin. Chief Flight Attendant Kelly Wexler. Cousin to Patricia. The resemblance wasn't hard to spot. Same eyes. Same polished edge. Kelly moved down the aisle with crisp professionalism, offering hot towels and pouring champagne for each first-class guest. Until she reached row 1. Then her pace slowed. Her tray shifted awkwardly, and she walked past Elena without a word. No towel. No greeting. Not even a glance. Elena didn't react. Not because she didn't notice, but because she did. She simply looked up for a second, registering Kelly's face, adding it to the growing list of silent aggressors. Her seatmate clicked his seatbelt, gave a short chuckle, and leaned in slightly. His voice was low, calculated. Guess nowadays, anyone with money can squeeze into this world. Elena turned her head, not in anger, not with a challenge. Just with steady, calm composure. You think money's all it takes to sit here? She asked softly. The man blinked, caught off guard. She gave him a faint smile. Not bitter. Just honest. If it were that easy, she said. Do you think I'd still need money to get here? He had no answer. She hadn't asked for one. Kelly returned, placing a simple glass of water on Elena's tray. No champagne. No towel. No menu. Just silence dressed as service. Elena said nothing. She knew what would happen if she did. Her words would be twisted, her tone dissected. So she sat still, eyes turned toward the window. The plane hadn't moved yet, but the tension in the cabin suggested they were already airborne, flying into an airspace no one else saw coming. The doors closed. Final boarding calls ended. Some passengers typed last-minute emails. Others sipped drinks. Elena kept her back straight, hands resting in her lap. She could feel it. Something wasn't over yet. Then Kelly reappeared. Standing once again at seat 1C, she leaned in and spoke quietly, her tone formal but heavy with command. Excuse me, ma'am. We need to ask you to move to the back row. There's been a last-minute adjustment to the cabin's weight distribution. Elena didn't look up right away. When she did, her voice was quiet but unshakably firm. Am I heavier than everyone else in this cabin? Kelly blinked. A flinch so subtle only someone watching closely would notice. But her face recovered quickly. This isn't personal. We're just following safety protocol. Your cooperation is appreciated. I understand, Elena replied evenly. And I'm also following internal corporate procedure. So I'll ask again. Why am I the only passenger being asked to move? Kelly's lips tightened. We need you to relocate. We're not authorized to provide further explanation. The air thickened. Passengers began to glance over the rims of their glasses and tablets. Some pretended to read. Others stared without shame. Elena's eyes met Kelly's. It wasn't to challenge. It was to confirm something deeper. That this moment was exactly what it looked like. And it wasn't over yet. Elena took a breath. Not out of exhaustion, but with intent. Calmly, she reached into her bag, withdrew her phone, and tapped into a secure internal app. A soft blue icon lit up on the screen. She typed a single line, "Trial complete. Submit file code to corporate." Then, without another word, she hit send. The app's quiet confirmation was almost anticlimactic, but something in Elena's expression, calm, unwavering, controlled, sent an unspoken message. Kelly Wexler, still hovering beside her, hadn't fully grasped what had just happened, but her instincts kicked in. She took half a step back. Elena placed her phone on the tray table and met Kelly's gaze one final time. Her voice remained gentle, but her words cut like ice wrapped in velvet. If this airline truly has a weight problem, maybe it's not the passengers who need relocating. Then she smiled. Not out of spite, not to provoke. It was a soft, unshakable smile, one that lived in the silence between confrontation and consequence. The kind of smile that lingers long after the moment has passed. Kelly froze. She didn't reply. She simply turned on her heel and disappeared into the galley, retreating without another word. But 1,000 miles away, at the Advalink Group's executive headquarters, Elena's signal had already arrived. Decryption began instantly. One line glowed on the internal command system. Level 2 trial complete. Initiate emergency personnel review. In that moment, no one on the plane knew the real power that had just been exercised. The woman they had tried to push from her seat, politely, systematically, was the very person who held the authority to decide who would still have a seat in the company by the time the next flight took off. The flight landed on time at 5:34 p.m. Passengers began standing, reaching overhead for their bags. Laughter, casual conversation, the soft jingle of belts unbuckling, all the usual post-landing noise. But Elena stayed seated, hands folded in her lap, eyes forward. She knew the flight wasn't truly over. Not yet. And she was right. 3 minutes after the cabin doors opened, a crew member in a crisp navy uniform stepped into the first-class cabin. He leaned down and whispered to Kelly Wexler, who stiffened, nodded, and turned toward Elena. "Ms. Moore," she said, voice flat, "please come with us. There's a security issue that needs clarification." No force. No handcuffs. Just a silent parade of curious, judging stares from the other passengers. Elena stood, nodded calmly, and followed them without protest. She was led into a secure conference room inside Cleargate Airport's internal investigation area. The room was furnished like a boardroom, dark wood table, ergonomic swivel chairs, digital display screens. Already seated were 4 individuals. The head of airport security, a Grand Sky Airlines representative, Chief Flight Attendant Kelly Wexler, and an observer from the Federal Aviation Administration. On the table in front of them sat a freshly printed report. Incident report, passenger Elena Moore, disruptive behavior and non-compliance following seat relocation request. Elena took her seat without a flicker of anxiety. She opened her handbag slowly and without haste. The others watched, some with expectancy, others with guilt. But she gave them no reaction. Instead, she retrieved a single white envelope, sealed in red wax bearing the unmistakable tri-branch emblem of the Advalink Group. She placed it on the table, broke the seal, and pulled out one page, smooth premium stock, etched with a subtle silver border. Then she began to read. Elena Moore, Senior Internal Audit Specialist, authorized by the Board of Mergers and Strategic Affairs, Advalink Group. I have been conducting a covert evaluation of Grand Sky Airlines Customer Experience Protocol under Audit Code 998, X, Scope, Discriminatory Conduct, mid to senior personnel level. The room fell into a vacuum of silence. The Grand Sky representative opened his mouth, but found no words. Kelly Wexler's eyes widened, color draining from her face. Elena calmly laid the document flat on the table. Then she lifted her phone, turned the screen toward the FAA observer, and added, "The entirety of my random screening at the boarding gate was recorded using a secondary, off-network camera system. This includes Supervisor Patricia Wexler's unjustified directive to remove me." She tapped again. This flight was part of a Level 3 field trial. Grand Sky Airlines has failed. Kelly sat frozen. Everything she'd done, the dismissiveness, the neglect, the public degradation, now echoed in her own mind like a ticking clock. The FAA observer gave a quiet nod of acknowledgement. The airline representative leaned back slowly, a thin sheen of sweat forming along his temples. It was the head of airport security who finally broke the silence. "Ms. Moore, we sincerely apologize for the mishandling you've endured. An internal investigation will begin immediately, and I assure you." Elena raised a hand gently, not harsh, not dramatic, just enough to stop the performance. Because from this moment on, it wasn't an apology that was needed. It was accountability. Elena Moore sat still, her voice unwavering. "I'm not here for apologies," she said, quiet but firm. "I'm here to see if this system is brave enough to look itself in the mirror." That single sentence rang louder than anything that had come before it. Within 45 minutes of that meeting, a high-priority email hit the inboxes of Grand Sky Airlines executive board. Suspend merger negotiations. Internal ethics compliance audit has failed. The same woman who had been escorted out of the priority boarding lane, silently humiliated in front of strangers, was now the reason Grand Sky Airlines stood on the brink of losing its $3.8 billion federal relief package. The same relief proposal Elena herself had signed off on. Now it would be paused and reconsidered, pending the successful completion of an extensive ethics retraining program, one designed by the complainant herself. Elena never raised her voice. She never made headlines. She didn't have to, because what she stood for spoke louder than any corporate title or press release ever could. The investigation wrapped up in less than 24 hours. Patricia Wexler, the supervisor who initiated the humiliating security check, was suspended indefinitely and removed from all leadership positions. Her cousin, Kelly Wexler, the flight attendant who had coldly passed Elena without so much as a towel or a greeting, was permanently reassigned. She would never work the first-class cabin again. Every staff member involved in the incident was ordered to submit a written report and complete the new ethics course personally designed by Elena Moore. The public didn't follow the story for long. No headlines screamed justice. No trending hashtags carried Elena's name. But inside the company, the echo was unshakable. Elena didn't grant interviews. She didn't file lawsuits. She didn't ask for compensation. Instead, she sent one email. It was posted internally, on the company-wide message board. "I don't need an apology. I only hope they never do this to anyone else." It was a simple line, but it landed with the force of a full-scale reform. That Saturday, as the sun filtered softly into Cleargate International's East Terminal hallway, the atmosphere was unusually quiet. Elena had just finished a private debrief with airport and airline executives. Her stride was steady as she walked toward the exit, her mission complete. Then by chance she saw her, Patricia Wexler. Once poised, smug, and dressed in pristine leadership attire, Patricia now stood behind the emergency assistance counter. Her uniform had changed. The executive badge was gone. Her shoulders slumped beneath a faded blue shirt. She was bent over, silently sorting traveler documents. Just another face in the crowd, almost unrecognizable in her new, quieter world. Elena could have walked past. No one would have blamed her. But something pulled her back, not out of vengeance, not to gloat, only to look. One final time. Patricia looked up. Her face froze, not with shame, not quite with guilt, but something smaller. She couldn't speak, couldn't offer a smile. All the words she'd once thrown around so easily were suddenly gone. Elena held her gaze. Her voice, when it came, was soft but unshakable. "You were right," she said. "I don't look like someone who usually sits in first class. Because I didn't come here to sit." A pause. Then, "I came to see how many people in this place still know how to act like human beings." There were no grand gestures. No parting shots. Elena turned and walked away, leaving behind a silence too heavy to fill. Because this wasn't about power, it was about principle. The woman they tried to remove had been the one with the authority to change the very system that tried to belittle her. And she had. Elena didn't need to win. She needed to ensure that the next person in line, the next traveler who didn't look the part, would never have to feel the way she did that day. Justice, after all, doesn't always roar. Sometimes it's the quiet that leaves the deepest mark. Have you ever felt dismissed because of how you looked? Have you ever chosen silence and later realized it was your strongest move? Share your story in the comments below. You never know. It might inspire the next story we tell. If this moved you, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Because stories of quiet courage, everyday justice, and simple human decency deserve to be heard. I'm your storyteller, and I'll see you in the next chapter that matters.